Imagine the soul as a bug high on the wall. We do not chase creation. Creation comes to us unbidden. Patience becomes a sacred posture. We wait in silence, watching the world send us its emissaries, a phrase, a scent, a sudden clarity. At that moment we act, not by force, but by attention. The psyche does not move on command. It waits. It lingers in doorways, delays appointments, stands at windows watching something far off, something unnamed. This waiting is not passivity, it is formative. It is how the soul makes its way into time. Modern life urges us toward speed, toward productivity and execution, but the soul has its own tempo, and it is often slow, circular, recursive. We do not rush a chrysalis. We do not scream at winter to hurry spring, and yet when it comes to the psyche, we demand results. To wait is to align with an ancient archetype, one not often honored in a culture obsessed with getting ahead. But this archetype does not belong to the realm of advancement. It lives in the underworld of delay, where things incubate, ferment, and deepen. Something is at work beneath appearances. The archetype of waiting says, not yet. It says something else must form before the gesture can be made. This kind of waiting is not laziness. It is reverence. Reverence for the mysterious unfolding of psyche in its own time, not ours. This is the deeper current behind the notion of don't try. The phrase sounds like an attack on effort, but it is a defense of something more essential, authenticity. The soul speaks when it is ready, and forcing it to speak before its time is like picking a fruit before it ripens. The taste will be bitter. The meaning hollow. What is true and resonant often emerges, not through pushing but through stillness. And that stillness is a kind of sacred patience, a trust that the imaginal will take form when it is ready to. One does not try to dream. The dream comes. The waiting soul is not idle. It is listening. It is caught in a subtle tuning toward what wants to arrive. Artists know this intimately. The painter stares at the canvas, brush paused. The poet walks for days with a half-line echoing in the mind. The lover feels the impulse to speak, but waits, because the words are not yet right, not yet born. In each case, something in the background is forming, and it must not be disturbed. To interrupt the wait is to abort the soul's own rhythm. Our language betrays us. We say wasting time as though time were a currency and not an atmosphere. But waste is only what the ego cannot measure. The soul wastes nothing. Even its detours are meaningful. Even its hesitations are rich with shape and symbol. In fact, it is often in the interval, the lull, that something essential is gestating. A dream half remembered, an image that won't leave us alone, a silence that thickens. These are not signs of failure. They are signs that something wants to be born sideways. This archetypal waiting is also a resistance to the heroic attitude. The hero moves forward, conquers, overcomes, but the soul often prefers the sidestep, the downward motion, the pause. It prefers to sink into an image rather than rise above it. And this descent is a kind of waiting too. Not for a signal, not for an outcome, but for presence. To become present to what is. To attend the moment without demanding it, transform, that too is soul work. Bukowski's "don't try" is not cynicism, it is devotion to the deeper process. To try is often to pretend we are the author of our own emergence. But emergence is a mystery. We are shaped by forces we cannot name. The impulse that leads to the first line of a poem, the intuition that shapes a decision, the sudden pull toward a stranger's face, none of these are products of deliberate effort. They are gifts received in the stillness of waiting. So perhaps the task is not to act, but to prepare, to become a vessel, to clean the inner house so that when the soul is ready, it finds welcome. This kind of waiting is a discipline, a stance, an art. It has nothing to do with laziness and everything to do with trust. Trust that what must come will come, if we do not obstruct it with ambition or anxiety. And so we wait like trees in winter, like birds before migration, like mythic figures suspended in time until the story opens again. In this waiting, we are not powerless. We are attuned, we are receptive, we are closer to soul than any heroic striving can bring us. Because when the moment does arrive, when the image reveals itself, when the word finally lands, it does so with the weight of necessity, not because we forced it, but because we were there, ready, listening. There are moments when something speaks before we can stop it. A sentence falls from the mouth, a gesture moves the hand, a turn in the street is taken with no conscious plan. These are not accidents. They are eruptions of the soul's deeper code emerging from a place the ego does not command. We call it spontaneity, but this word is far too soft, too polite. What we're witnessing in such moments is the psyche asserting itself. It does not ask permission. The culture demands that we be deliberate, that we plan, set goals, rehearse responses, but the soul is not a strategic planner. It does not operate in bullet points. It moves like weather, sudden, unpredictable, thick with image. And in those spontaneous eruptions, we glimpse who we really are beneath the surfaces we polish for the world. That is the soul's code, not a moral script, not a behavioral pattern to be corrected or improved, but a peculiar, specific way of being that insists on itself again and again through moods, mistakes, obsessions, and style. We must be careful here. Spontaneity is not the same as impulsivity. The former comes from deep below, from the roots of the psyche, the latter from the surface static of unexamined need. What matters is depth. The spontaneous act carries the weight of archetype. It is not done merely for effect or provocation. It is done because it must be done, not to impress or control, but to express, and not expression in the theatrical sense, but in the ancient one, to press out from within, to let what is inner become outer. In the language of craft, the artist does not try to find originality. It happens, often by accident, often when they stop trying altogether. The hand slips, and something real appears. The poet loses the thread of thought and writes the truth. The musician forgets the chart and finds the soul. This is not skill, it is surrender. Not submission, but an opening, a space cleared so that the code can show itself. The soul's code is not interested in social approval. In fact, it often shows up in ways that disrupt expectate. The spontaneous laugh at a funeral, the tears shed during joy, the inexplicable attraction, the sudden withdrawal. These are not failures of consistency. They are the soul correcting the flatness of persona. The code speaks when the mask slips. If we attend to our lives imaginally, we begin to see these moments not as mistakes, but as messages. What happens when you do what you did not plan to do? When a word leaves your mouth and surprises even you? That's where the psychic fingerprint reveals itself. That's the thread to follow. It may not be convenient. It may not be logical, but it is authentic. And authenticity is not a performance. It is a fidelity to the imaginal necessity at work in a person. Spontaneity is the refusal of the ego to micromanage the soul. It is the rebellion of the deeper self against the tyranny of usefulness. In a world addicted to productivity, spontaneity is not just a quirk, it is a radical act. It says, I will not be reduced to my functions. I will not serve your schedule. I will move when the image moves and not before. There is an aesthetic dimension to all this. Spontaneity gives form to the invisible. It gives gesture, kusu, feeling. A spontaneous act can be ugly, tender, grotesque, sublime, but it is always real. And the real, when seen imaginally, is always beautiful, even in its brokenness. The child drawing with no thought of art, the lover speaking without rehearsal, the old man laughing suddenly at nothing. These are all images of soul in motion. To live from the code means to trust these moments, even when they contradict the narrative we've written for ourselves. The plan says go left, the soul veers right. The bio says calm, the mouth shouts. The resume says leader, the body wants to sleep. We betray ourselves when we ignore these departures. They are not deviations, they are corrections. The soul is not here to be efficient. It is here to make meaning, and meaning does not come by effort alone. It arrives often unannounced in a gesture, a slip, a spontaneous breath. When we live close to that edge, we live imaginally. We do not try, we wait, we watch, and we leap when the image says leap. Not because we are ready, but because we are moved. There is a certain poetry that hides in plain sight, in the scuffed floorboards, in the coffee spoon left unwashed, in the awkward silence between two people who don't know what to say next. It is not the grand lyricism of the sublime or the elevated. It does not arrive wrapped in golden language or dressed in epic drama. It comes instead in the folds of the everyday ordinary moments where the soul speaks most clearly. We have been trained to overlook these things. The ordinary is dismissed, made invisible by habit, numbed by repetition. The breakfast table, the bus ride, the pile of laundry, these are seen as merely functional, things to get through, pass over, endure. But the soul has no interest in function. It is drawn to what lingers, what whispers beneath appearances. And that whisper is often loudest in the most modest of places. We must ask, what is the image of the ordinary? Not the word, but the image. The creased face of an old man staring out a diner window. The burnt edge of toast. The sag in a tired dog's body, each is an image of psyche at work. Not symbols in need of decoding, but presences in need of seeing. When we begin to notice them, the ordinary stops being a backdrop. It becomes animate. This is not about sentimentality. It is not about romanticizing the poor or glorifying the mundane. It is about perceiving soul where we have been taught not to look. The soul is not hiding in the heights. It is crouched in the gutter, laughing softly, watching us miss it again and again. Bukowski knew this. He found his poems in urinals, in hangovers, in barroom arguments, and cheap motel sheets, not because he loved filth, but because he knew the gods still lingered in broken things. What makes the ordinary poetic is not what it is, but how it is seen. When the soul gazes, it does not measure, it lingers, it imagines, it imbues. To see a rusted faucet and feel a pang, that is soul. To watch a woman sweep her doorstep and sense a myth beneath her motion, that is the poetic mode. Not embellishment, but deep seeing. And in that seeing, what was dull becomes radiant. This poetics is not constructed. It is revealed. It emerges when the veil of use drops. And we look at things as if, for the first time, a shoe is not just a shoe. It is a relic of all the walking, the rain it endured, the places it has carried its owner's longing. The refrigerator hum is not noise. It is the pulse of domestic life, the background thrum of a world trying to sustain itself. It may be that this kind of seeing requires a certain wound. The unbroken eye rarely sees soul. It sees objects. It categorizes, labels, moves on. But the wounded eye, the one slowed by loss or age or awe, sees differently. It notices the chipped mug and feels something. It watches the steam rise from the pot and thinks of childhood. In that moment, the ordinary becomes holy, not because it has changed, but because we have. There is, in the ordinary, a resistance to abstraction. It is heavy, textured, rooted. It reminds us that the soul does not float. It dwells, it lives in rooms and bodies, in repetition and error. It does not ascend. It descends, finds meaning in the thickness of life, not its escape. And this descent is poetic. It gives beauty back to what has been dismissed. The imagination thrives not only in the exotic, but in the familiar. It is not always necessary to climb mountains or visit foreign lands to feel the gods. Sometimes they knock at the window at dusk in the orange glow against the dishes. Sometimes they sit beside you on the train in the form of a stranger's breath. The sacred is not always dramatic. Often it wears a gray coat and asks for nothing. To cultivate the poetics of the ordinary is to reawaken to a world already alive. It is to seeking soul in ideals and begin finding it in textures, smells, stumbles, pauses. The soul's language is not only metaphor, it is material, a crack in the wall, a cough in the silence, the slant of light on a linoleum floor. These are not signs of transcendence. They are immanence, fully here if we choose to see. And seeing, truly seeing, is itself the poetic act, not writing it down, not shaping it into something else, but meeting the world with the eyes of soul. That is where the poem begins. Not on the page, but in the seeing. In the moment we turn toward the ordinary, and without effort it begins to shimmer. Ethics has been made too narrow, too heavy, reduced to rules, duties, consequences. But soul does not speak in commandments. It speaks in images, in gestures, in the way a person walks into a room or chooses a shirt in the morning. It speaks in tone, in style, in the very texture of a life. We have misunderstood ethics if we think it lies only in decisions. There is an aesthetic to it, a shape, a rhythm, a feel. To live ethically is not only to do good, it is to live beautifully, soulfully, attuned to the form of things. Form matters, not as ornament, but as expression. A thing done with grace carries a different weight than one done by obligation. The soul senses this immediately. We feel it when someone holds a door with true presence and when someone recites the right phrase but with dead eyes. The difference is not content, but image, not action, but enactment. And this distinction collapses the hard wall we've built between ethics and aesthetics. The good and the beautiful are not separate. They are two aspects of the same psychic event. What we call conscience may in fact be an aesthetic sense, a felt knowledge of what fits, what distorts, what wounds the image. When we violate that inner shape, we feel shame, not only for what we've done, but for how poorly it was done. There's an ugliness to it, a soul cringe. And likewise, when we act in alignment with the deep image of who we are, there's a grace, even if the act defies conventional morality. Sometimes soul requires breaking rules, but doing so with integrity, with beauty. We must learn to listen to the image, not just to reason. The image does not argue. It reveals. It appears as a face, a gesture, a dream. Ethics begins here. In the aesthetic response to what appears before us, the face of another, the sound of their voice, the dignity of their suffering. It is not abstract, it is imaginal. And in that encounter, something in us moves. That movement is the beginning of care. And care, too, has a shape. To care beautifully is not the same as to care efficiently. The nurse who slows down to adjust the blanket, the teacher who sees the hidden sorrow in a child's silence, these are aesthetic actions, not just moral ones. They arise from a deep sense of proportion, of psychic resonance. There is tact, tone, timing. These are the ethics of soul, not derived from theory but from presence. Bukowski, with all his roughness, understood this. He wrote what needed to be written when it needed to be written without decoration. That too is a form of beauty, not prettiness, but exactness. The ethics of precision, saying only what the soul allows, nothing more. No trying, no excess. The form fits the feeling. There is a rightness to it, even if it is coarse, even if it stings. Soul recognizes this rightness and trusts it more than any polished lie. We are surrounded by ethical postures that are aesthetically hollow, politicians invoking justice with dead eyes, corporations printing compassion on cardboard. These gestures offend not only morality but imagination. They are violations of beauty, not because they lack style, but because their style is false. There is no soul in them. And when soul is absent, no amount of correctness can redeem the act. So ethics must become imaginal again. Less about righteousness, more about presence. Less about rules, more about responsiveness. What is required of me now in this moment with this face before me? Not according to law, but according to image. What wants to happen here through me as a work of aesthetic necessity? To live this way is to live with the ongoing sense that each act leaves a trace, not only in history, but in form, awake in the field of soul. What shape do we leave behind? What tone vibrates in the aftermath? This is not about reputation, but about imprint, and the soul records it all, not as a ledger, but as a gallery. Let the life, then, be art, not artifice, not performance, but the deep art of being in the world in a way that responds with fidelity to what is. This is an ethical task, to walk with beauty, to speak with care, to refuse what is ugly in gesture, even if it is permitted by rule. The soul does not ask for perfection. It asks for form, for a life shaped in accordance with its own necessity, for acts that echo not because they were correct, but because they were beautiful in their truth. So stand in your room. Listen. Wait. If the world offers you a poem, a truth, a shriek, reach. Slap it with love. Do not try to own it. Do not try to force it. Don't try. Not because you are lazy, but because the soul knows how to speak when given the silent space to sing. And when it sings, answer,